Thanks for tuning in again to the Replatform podcast, sponsored by MD Phill and Klaviyo. You're listening to myself, James Gerd, and my co-host, Paul Rogers. How's it going today, mate?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm embracing another freezing cold Monday morning, but looking forward to this episode. So thanks for everybody tuning back in. And if it's your first time, a warm welcome. We hope you enjoy it. If you subscribe, we send out new episode alerts every week. We'd also love you to give us a like on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. It makes us feel good about our own inadequacies. So let me just set up the topic and I'll introduce you to our guest today. So we're talking about the impact of integrating Klaviyo and Octane AI to create personalised communications, focusing on one specific business, Curlsmith. And the pretext of this is basically quizzes have become really popular in e-commerce as businesses seek new ways to engage customers in product discovery and provide richer online customer experience. But however, as with any shiny new bit of kit, success depends upon the quality of implementation, how tailored the quiz is to suit each audience needs, and also how it tackles their pain points and decision processes for product discovery. So today we're talking to the team at a highly experienced agency whose focus is on using customer data to drive business growth via CRM automation. We're going to cover using and evolving product quizzes for e-com, the impact of a quiz versus standard routes for product discovery, and smarter ways to use data to drive personalisation. So let's do introduction. We'll start with Phil. Let's start with you. So Phil and Dave both work at Paase, and Phil's the MD. So do you want to give people a little bit of an introduction, and we'll hand over to your brother?
Yeah, no problem at all. So hello, everybody. So I set up Paase back in the summer of 2019, pre those heady days of COVID. Really to build on my background of being tech side and working with large enterprise businesses to try and bring some of that skill set, knowledge, understanding down to the SME markets and owner-led businesses at the time. What we were trying to do and what we've been quite successful at is to translate that customer data into actionable marketing activity. So rather than trying to move businesses along from just broadcasting general newsletters all the time to really focusing on that customer journey piece. We got involved with Klaviyo very early on back in sort of August 2019. And actually we started working with Curlsmith back in September, October 19 when they were on, at the time, MailChimp. We helped them migrate over to Klaviyo in 2020. So yeah, really our focus as an organization is using brands' customer data to drive increased retention.
Cool, excellent. Yeah, it's amazing that how many still do mass broadcasts and not targeted communications. It's bonkers, but yeah, really important approach to have. And so, Dave, and I know we talked about before we started recording this that your brother kindly stitched you up and brought you in on this last minute on a Monday morning. So, do you want to give everyone on the podcast an introduction as well, please?
Yeah, so I'm Dave. I'm Phil's brother, so the commercial manager. So more sales led now, but I did a lot of work with the Curlsmith and Octane quiz. So it's nice to be on the call to sort of discuss what we did.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. Right, you ready for some questions, gents?
Let's go for it.
Fantastic. Right, Paul, you can start as usual, mate.
Lovely. So the first question, and I think maybe I'll start with you, Phil, and if you want to add anything, Dave, go for it. In terms of the kind of business challenge that you typically solve for the brands that you're working with around kind of CRM and personalization, like what is that challenge? Like why did Curlsmith originally come to Paase?
Okay, so I think there's two things there. I think brands sometimes don't articulate or define what they mean by personalization. So quite often someone has said we need to do personalization. Nobody really knows what it is. And you've got some people thinking it's as simple as a first name merge. You've got other people thinking I need to be a bespoke one-to-one messaging service. Our view is there's somewhere in the middle, there's something commercially viable around broad stroke personalization. Now, the biggest challenge we find when brands want to start to delve into personalization, they haven't got the data points required to deliver that journey. So quite often, all of us are consumers around on this call. We'll go into a website, we're new to that site, and we'll give an email address. But suddenly we're expecting that brand to give us a personalized journey, whereas the only piece of data we've shared is our email address. So actually, brands then start to collect more data, but it's historically based on transaction. So Phil's been onto Curlsmith. He's brought a product. Whether that's the right product for Phil or not, the brand doesn't really know, but it will start to make some assumptions. Go, okay, Phil's brought product A. We're going to send more content about product A. Where we want to move businesses through to is having that two-way communication that then starts to say, well, actually, Phil, you don't need product A, you need product B, C, and D for these reasons. And thinking about how do you bring that kind of online shop assistant to life? So you walk into the store and you ask somebody, say, I've got this type of hair, or I've got this problem, and there's a recommendation made. So this is where we're using Octane to start to really drive that personalized experience by listening to what people are saying, taking that data in, and then asking a different question based on that answer, basically.
That makes sense. And I guess onto the quiz more specifically. So after you'd kind of set it up and let it run for a while, how has this evolved over time? Like, how have you kind of taken learnings and adapted the quiz? And then what kind of things have you learned about the customer? 2 stages to that. So I think for us, the quiz itself has been tweaked and evolved. I think one of the key learnings we got quite quickly is how to serve the quiz. So you can serve it in a number of different ways. The traditional on a page on the site within the navigation that people can find to, or Octane actually has its own kind of pop-up builder, so you could build it within a pop-up. What we found, and Dave can correct me on this if I'm wrong, because I'm going back a little bit into the depths of my memory, was actually when we hosted it on the pop-up, the conversion rate was less than it was doing natively on the page. So actually we changed back to a Klaviyo pop-up and used the pop-up to direct people through to the online quiz within the host. So it's almost not only the questions you're asking, but how you're serving the technology to make the best use of it. And then you'll have to forgive me with the second part of the question. What have you learned about the customer from the quiz?
Okay, so I think within 7 months, we'd gained 100,000 new subscribers. So brand new, not just having an email address, but having profile information and product recommendations about those individuals. And Dave, again, I think it was about 85,000 of the existing database within 7 months had gone back through, subscribed in effect by going through the process, but also added all that information about themselves. So we suddenly knew what type of curly hair they had, whether it was heavy curls, light curls, how thick the hair was, and the products that we would recommend, or the Curlsmith recommended for those individuals. That in turn then allows us to start to tweak the messaging that we're giving to the customers by using Klaviyo product blocks to show and hide different pieces of content based on those answers. So again, very quickly you're taking data and inputs from the customer directly and then serving them back at a broad, commercially viable level, real strong product recommendations.
That makes sense. And then I guess I went through the quiz the other day and it's obviously great. And I can see how you could learn a lot of information around potential customers. It's pretty long. And I was going to ask how you've seen this perform, whether you've tested it versus a shorter version. I've seen others in the past talk about longer kind of quizzes or processes being more like a skin in the game mentality and maybe getting more kind of subscribers at the final point. But yeah, what have you got any kind of learnings from the kind of length of the quiz?
I think from my side, I think it's probably one of the longer quizzes we've built and done, or that we've sort of had with our clients. It's engaging though, so people are going through it. People aren't dropping off, so the numbers suggest that actually the length is right for them. The question is, will people drop off after question 1, question 2? What is that engagement like? If people gets bored, it becomes an issue. But people know that going through that quiz, they're getting a group of recommended products. It also says in the quiz that actually it only takes 2 minutes, I think it says on the quiz. So having that sort of time frame in there, that is a key to people go, actually, do you know what? It's only 2 minutes and I know what I'm going to get at the end of it.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I've seen this when I've been doing work with people on customer insight surveys, which often get sent out by email because that's the main opt-in, and telling people explicitly on the starting page of a survey, this takes less than 5 minutes to complete. If you leave it blank, you find fewer people get past the first page. When they see multiple step, they go, I can't be asked, because we're all quite lazy humans. So yeah, interesting that you've done that and found that. I also liked the point you made earlier, Phil. I think it's a really poignant one around this personalisation, because I've seen this with clients when you say the word personalisation to a business that doesn't have a big data team, the instant thing is, oh Christ, I need a really expensive tool, or it's impossible. We don't have the resources because it's massive. And then breaking it down and pulling out specific capabilities and saying you could get here within 6 to 8 weeks, and we can measure it, and we think the uplift will be X. I think it's by far the best way. And I've seen that before with people on their email comms where they've just picked, right, okay, we're going to take first time buyers and do a warm-in welcome series and add a level of personalised communication that they wouldn't otherwise have got. And then you suddenly get the interest. People go, oh, we can do this. And then we move on to the next bit.
I think quite often brands think about the outputs rather than the inputs to drive the personalisation. So it will be, we want to be able to do this. And they haven't got the data points to be able to trigger that and actually backfill those trigger points. I also think we talk about commercially viable a lot of, well, actually, if you've got a segment of, I don't know, 10 people that have bought the white T-shirt in size medium, well, actually, if you then send a follow-up email to those 10 people, by the time you've got a 50% open rate, that's down to 5, you get a 10% click through to 1 or 2 people, a 3% conversion on the website. Suddenly you go, is it actually worth the effort? And it's how do you get those businesses to go, well, if you've got 10,000 people, maybe split it in half and 50-50. If you've got 100,000, that's where maybe you can start going into 10% pots, because you've got that relevancy. Yep. But start broad and take it on a journey. I think the brands that struggle to do that are the ones that try to go from zero to hero overnight, and it's almost impossible. You'll spend all your time almost creating the creative variants that you will need to drive that personalization, versus actually the value of just getting an email that's broadly personalized out the door.
Yeah, 100%. I've done work in people in training programs where it's right. Okay, yes, you can do it, but you're trying to do too much. Exactly that is, you don't have the data, you don't have the analysts, you can't possibly do the analysis to know what's working and what's not. So pick a segment where you have a decent sale, like you say, and often like first people who've bought once but haven't bought a second time, and using them and doing it segmented based on the category they bought or the type of product, depending on what vertical you're in. Yeah, it's a nice way of framing this, I think.
And if you're a new business and you're not quite sure of your retention rates of how the product repurchase frequency, it's easier maybe if there's a subscription style business where you're selling a product that's going to last 30 days. But if you're selling T-shirts or trainers, people will buy at a different cadence, and it's actually starting to work out what they are. You could have a really defined, beautiful, personalized journey, but if I've just made a purchase, I'm unlikely to buy that T-shirt at £50 again that week. It's about trying to understand which levers to pull at which times.
So I've got an additional question to throw at you guys. I'm interested because I know Paul's done a lot of work with quizzes and things like Octane. I've worked with a lot of businesses where I've not implemented it, but I've worked with them to help them understand how they could use them and the commercial benefits. And I've seen in industries, beauty, skincare specifically, it works very well because there is a specific personal influence to the purchase. Skincare, for example, with any specific skin issues you got. I can see with the hair, depending on what type of hair you've got, if you've got really dense, afro hair, for example, the hair care treatment you need is totally different to somebody with thinner, finer hair. So therefore, the more data you give and the more info you get back, the greater value you're getting as a customer. Do you find that there are, there's just certain types of product that don't suit the quiz as well? Or do you think it can generally be adapted to any product set?
My personal view, and again, people may disagree, is it can be adapted. So we've set it up for dog food manufacturers. We've got it for companies with trainers, and it's about thinking, well, actually, what's this? How do we better serve and personalize the future comms? So use it, not from a data acquisition perspective. So I say, well, actually, we know Phil is, size 10 shoes. He's in the UK in this market. There's so much value there. And actually, if the value exchange to the customer is that we're going to make some product recommendations to you off the back of this by giving this information. So I think it can work. I think there are certain sectors, maybe the gifting space, where it's going to be, you're not buying for yourself, you're buying for somebody else. That there may be a challenge there. But generally, I think I liken it to, the concierge in a shop or the shop assistant. You're coming in, you're asking a question, you're asking for a recommendation, and that customer's using, that shop assistant is using the answers you're giving to make a recommendation. It's that same process.
Yeah, I think that an interesting point about the GIF one. I've seen it done very badly on GIFs, where because basically everyone gets the same GIF recommendations. Yeah. And you're basically on a category page filtering by price, and it's like, what was the point of that?
But there's a way
you can do gifting correctly, and I think you can build it the right way. So we one of our coffee companies we work with do a gifting section. But the question is, it tailors it. Are you buying for yourself? Are you buying for somebody else? It literally goes off on a different thing, because you can know flavor profiles, for example. You can know what somebody likes and what somebody dislikes as part of that gifting process. Therefore, you can start to get recommended products. But you have to design in a way that Klaviyo knows that you're buying the person as a gift and it's not your profile properties. So if you're then going to do stuff within the email, that you're actually dictating the right email to the right person at the right time.
Yeah. I think
sorry.
Go on, Karen.
I was going to say, the art of design, I think the principle's the same as survey design. You can get a very poorly designed survey and have a really crap response rate if you don't think about the audience and the value to them.
Yeah, I mean, the lovely thing about Octane is the fact that you can run multiple quizzes almost nested. So you can start to say, well, actually, the first question is, are you buying for yourself or for somebody else? And then split them into different quizzes based on those profiles and those answers. There's nothing to say that you do an almost a new customer quiz and then do a follow-up to legacy customers, et cetera, et cetera. So you can run multiple quizzes within the same functionality, which is really helpful.
I know it's a leap on from when I started doing stuff like this years ago, before these tools existed, and things like Survey Gizmo, because the user interface isn't quite as attractive as using an Octane.
No, and I think there's other pieces out there that can do kind of customer feedback, but it's that for us the power is how you get that data into Klaviyo and then use it as actionable data, rather than like a retrospective look back of, oh yeah, that was buying, someone was buying for a gift. The fact is we know that, and we can action that from day zero onwards.
What is Amplience? In a word, it's freedom. The freedom to build a digital experience as limitless as your vision. Create, preview, schedule, and manage all your content in one easy place. Find out more at amplience.com. Amplience. Experience freedom.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of, because we've been talking about data, right? Zero first-party data is becoming a massive land grab for e-com teams, because all the problems around third-party data and privacy and what you can and cannot use. What percentage of users who start a quiz do you typically see are submitting and getting to the end of it versus those that drop out?
Dave's on mute, so I'll answer this for him on his behalf. The wonders of online. So we're about 90% completion rate on the Curlsmith quiz. So it is very high. And again, I think it's about, to Paul's point earlier, making sure you're not asking for too much, but you're providing that value and that context of why you're asking. So I think the Curlsmith quiz is a fantastic one, but it's a complicated, or more complicated area than I ever believed possible for a man with short hair just wants to buy a wash and go. The complexities are there, so the questions there are relevant, and I think that refinement is there. You take a dog food quiz, it may be, have you got an allergy? Are you a puppy or an adult dog or a senior dog? You can do the same results in 2 or 3 questions. So it's about tailoring it and also thinking about what are you going to use that data for. I don't believe in taking data just for the sake of taking data. I think there's got to be a context and a reason behind, we're going to be able to action this data moving forward, and this is why we're taking it.
And just expanded on that. So the next question is, for those who do abandon, and maybe not just in the context of Curlsmith, but maybe with other brands as well, do you ever try and recover those users or customers, and what level of impact does that have?
So if we know we've got an email address on site and they're Klaviyo cookie seeded, they'll go through the standard sort of abandonment series messaging that we have in there. If they don't put their email address, we don't have any of that Octane data, so it's hard to sort of personalize in it. Yeah, we could retarget them. I think if someone's dropped out of a quiz, it's almost like if someone's unsubscribed from an email, do you then retarget on social media? For me, it's like they've dropped out for a reason. Is there any point retargeting? If they don't go on to buy, then potentially we look at re-pushing them back through the quiz afterwards. For me, a first-time buyer is not a customer; they're a trialist. But they're really only just trialing the brand, so it's about how to get them into a second one. So if they haven't brought the right product because they didn't complete the quiz, then potentially we would look at that kind of branching out piece in terms of giving them a slightly different message.
I think Paul raises an interesting point here as well, because there's a thought process and a potential test about where do you ask for the email address. So you can go through a quiz, and in effect the results page is gated by an email. So actually, do you ask for the quiz, the email address up front, in which case you could then potentially retarget people, versus the convenience of getting them through and go, okay, it's just one more question. Okay, enter my email address. So that data, it depends on where you're asking for the data. Now, I couldn't say what's right or wrong. I think my personal preference is to ask for that email address kind of at the end, especially with an incentive of, we'll give you X% off your first order when you complete the quiz type thing. So there's an element of the first party cookies there, but they might not have been tied to an email address at that point.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And next question. So have you, what, from a purely kind of conversion and transactional perspective, what is the impact of sending a user through a quiz versus, a standard landing page or collection, for example? In your experience, does the quiz typically perform better? I know I've definitely seen an increase in people doing prospecting activity via social and sending people directly through to quizzes. What's your view on that?
It's a tough one, and again, it comes back to brands quite often just doing a quiz and not doing that kind of A/B testing of quiz versus no quiz. I think it's about the value of that data, and also, Curlsmith, what worked really well for their quiz is that they did some social media marketing to push people to the quiz. That's where the real benefits are. You're driving traffic to it versus just hoping traffic will trip over the site on their usual browsing activity. So I think there's a couple of ways here. I know Dave's we had some really strong results with the email that's fed off the back of the Curlsmith quiz. So you complete the quiz, you may go on and transact, but you're going to get a results email. And Dave, I think that was about 1.5% of their total digital revenue was delivered just from that one email alone. So not even email, total digital revenues. So very, very powerful. You could argue that some of those would have gone on to complete their transaction anyway. It's not kind of ring fenced with an A/B test.
Well, so that 1.5% was actually a slightly smaller number than actually. It was actually 3.5%, but we would assume that we were actually taking some people away from the site back to the email. So I kind of justified what we would have lost out of the sort of the welcome journey and those kind of things. So 1.5 was a decent number.
That makes sense. And how have your clients, how have Curlsmith found working with Octane? Have they found, when I first worked with Octane, which was quite a while ago, I remember the merchandising side was quite time consuming, and, you had to build out different sets of results, and some of the templating was a little bit inflexible in places. How have they found working with it? How have those areas come along since it was first introduced?
So I think there's two sides to this. One is, part of the bigger challenge with quizzes is generating I've got a bit of feedback, sorry. Is almost starting at the bottom. So with your results, well, what are you trying to hit? How are you trying to segment the customers to give them results? Otherwise you can be too complicated. I think that's one of almost the pre-sales element of working with brands, is that they want to try and get too much out of it from day one. It's about actually how do you do those broader brush steps and then move them forward. The platform itself, continues to evolve. I do think they've introduced custom CSS elements to it versus what it was originally, where it was purely linking into the Shopify product library. We do a lot of work with them, as a partner of theirs, to develop those pages and the quizzes on their behalf. So they lean heavily on us in that sense. I think with all of these, there are, if a brand is highly critical of design and has a bespoke site, I think there's definitely challenges, or it needs scoping properly to really get it integrated into a platform, into a custom site really well. A simple Shopify theme store is a little bit easier because, again, the brand, the guidelines meet there. The other side of that is that, another challenge we've seen recently is the actual product merchandising in itself. If it's not set up and configured correctly, trying to find those recommended products, it all ties back to that unsexy data layer underneath. If that's not set up correctly, it can bring out the wrong results, or you've then got to customize it more and more heavily to get it to where you need it to be.
And so Octane's got the ability, if I understand correctly, to pass submission data into the customer property in Klaviyo. I'd love that. Some people might know what that means. Other people might be new to thinking, well, what does that mean? What's the benefit? Is this something you're doing? And if so, what is the benefit to the business of having that data pass through? How can you use it?
So the answer is yes, we are doing it, and this is the key thing for us. So I was looking at a site recently that had it's got a Christmas gift quiz, and they haven't asked for an email address purely because they're looking at it from a website conversion perspective. We want not to put a barrier in place for a customer to go through the quiz. But suddenly that individual browsing the site is given the fact that they're buying for their wife, or they've got X to spend, they've got a preference on, I don't know, scent or whatever it may be. All that data is there. They've given that data, but it's only available within that store or that session at the time. What we can do with the Klaviyo Octane quizzes and integration is start to say, well, okay, Phil's gone through this site. He's saying he's buying for a gift. It's for his partner, and he wants to spend X, and his partner has a preference towards, floral smells. All that information is then stored in Klaviyo's custom properties. So the lovely thing about Klaviyo is how quick it is to action and get going. But it is a little bit, limited in terms of the data sometimes, because you've got a customer profile, email address, first name, last name. You've then got the transactional data that's stored against it, and you can do elements of that data. If you then want to start collecting that preference data or that personalization data, you then need to kind of build that through. So you can use flows in Klaviyo to start to store information about the fact that, I know, Dave has previously purchased, a men's white T-shirt. But you've got to manually do that. Where the Octane Klaviyo integration comes in is if Dave's gone onto a quiz and he's put in that he's interested in men's T-shirts, color white, all that profile information is then stored directly into Klaviyo as a custom property. So it's generating that on the fly and allowing us to then use that data to trigger personalized comms within emails or natively new emails. So the fact is we can use that to power personalization in campaigns moving forward.
So like Curlsmith have obviously got a lot of growth through CRM and their focus on the area. Apart from the quiz that you've worked with them on, which had a lot of success, what other things have you been doing to help them achieve growth?
Okay, so we've got a long-standing relationship with Curlsmith. So when I first got introduced to them back into 2019, they were on MailChimp at the time, and I think Paul will remember this. Shopify and MailChimp weren't talking to each other. You had to go through a third-party platform to do anything involving data. What we've done as a business working with them is migrated them to Klaviyo. We've set up a number of the key functions within that process around the customer experience or the customer journey. So, welcome emails when people sign up, and people get different messaging based on where they signed up or how they signed up. So the pop-up, email footer, the quiz and the checkout, they all get slightly different messaging based on that activity. You've then got your retargeting messages. So, your top of funnel. So collection abandonment, browser abandonment, add to cart, basket abandonment. So all of those as people come through the funnel. But then there's a lot of work on the data as well, so behind the scenes. So they've got a large database. Not all of it is engaged with email at any one time. So thinking about that email frequency management of, well, actually this cohort of people are more engaged with email. So actually the frequency may be slightly higher than the cohort that came in last Black Friday and haven't really opened an email since. So we're starting to think about the data to enable us to manage deliverability, customer experience, and ensure that we're not, that we don't want our brands to be 3 times a week, discount heavy to everybody all the time. It's about managing that each individual cohort correctly with the right frequency and the right messaging.
Right. And last 2 questions. So my second to last question. What are your favorite implementations of quizzes within e-com sites and Octane generally?
Oh, that's a tough one. Dave, you got any
apart
thoughts?
From the one you've just talked about?
Yeah.
We've done one for a midwife company, and this was a good one because there's basically 4 separate quizzes within one, but it allows us to then scale out those 4 quizzes onto different stages of that pregnancy journey. So I quite like that one because that was a lot of legwork in terms of working out the logic of those bits. Octane have got a new AI tool which looks really cool. I haven't actually managed to be able to use it yet, so that looks like a really interesting one to come into. come into play.
Great. I think, two that I really like. So one is Maeve. I don't know if you've seen that one, MAEV, and it's a pet food quiz, but it like personalizes as you go, like changes like some of the content and imagery and stuff. And then I think Spoke's really good from a design and kind of journey perspective. If you could change the Curlsmith implementation, like maybe beyond the capabilities of Octane, or maybe beyond the limitations you might have with the client, like what would you change? Like what do you think could be improved on the implementation?
I think there's always room for improvement. I think some of the data integrations, we'd like to be able to get more data into Klaviyo. You'll know this, Paul, from your time looking at it as well. It's very, very good, and it's similar in a way to Klaviyo in that actually it does 90% of everything you need it to do. I.e., you can just get in, get going, and you can go from sort of zero to hero very easily with the right sort of structure and process. It's when you want to get into that 10% of that customization, I think, like with all platforms, it's done to a level where it does just about what you need. But when there's those 10% edge cases that you really want to push the boundaries, that's where I think that the platform, starts to fail, but starts to, you start to hit the buffers of what's possible. And that's where you may start thinking, well, actually, do I go for a more custom setup with, get my developers to build something? Now, we have this conversation quite often with our customers of, well, I can get our developers to build something versus, paying a monthly fee. 9 times out of 10, our view is actually using a tool that can do it front end that a marketeer can manage themselves is generally better than getting the developers to build it as a custom activity. Purely from an ongoing management perspective, i.e., you've done a development project to build a quiz, but you then want to change the third question to something else. Well, actually, then you've got to rebook it in with the developers to get that question changed versus the front end of Octane being able to go in there and actually do it yourself. And that's where I think sometimes it's understanding what the opportunity and the scope of the project is up front. So is Octane the right fit? And it will be things like that. The other side is, the zero-party cookies that you're then capturing as well, which is really helpful. So I think for me, Octane, it's the design, being able to upload more custom CSS. It's being able to maybe, ideally with their AI tool, almost develop the question, some basic questions on its own once it's looked at your data and generate that. That could be the future. But I think generally, we can talk about the bells and whistles, but 90% of it is there and brands can get on and use it quite quickly now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, we've seen a massive uplift of people just being able to roll it out. And I think before Octane came on the market, or when it was still a chatbot back in the day, I remember all the different tools that did this took months to roll out and cost, thousands and thousands of pounds a month. So yeah, I think it's really good that it's like a bit of a commodity now in the Shopify.
Yeah, I mean, you could almost look at it in a way of, I've been in the email space for well over a decade now, and used to go into brands and talk to them about, putting the platform in place with basket abandonment, and developers going, well, we can build a basket abandonment, we can see that. But again, it comes down to then it's an IT-led process versus a marketeer-led process. And then someone's got to manage that process. And I think sometimes that convenience and speed to market and be able to almost test quickly and fail quickly is more important than, saving a couple of $100 a month in fees by building it yourself.
I think it's also, if you're going to develop your own one, you always want a proof of concept that the quiz is going to work. So this Octane build gives you that proof of concept before you even spend money in building the developer's one, because developers' time obviously costs more than being able to do it. So if you get to the point of limitation of it, at least you've got a proof of concept that it works.
Cool. I've found that really interesting. Thanks, gents. I really like the idea of quiz, and I've seen some good implementations. I think the key takeaways from this is just thinking through that user journey and thinking through what data do you want to collect, but also what the value to the customer is, because I think that's the key, isn't it? If there's no perceived value to the customer, that's when you get the high abandonments, because they give up, they can't see why they're carrying this on.
Yeah. And this is where it comes back to that personalisation thing as a whole piece around, if you're, and we talked about it, alluded to, so if you're a larger organization with a data team, with a good sized CRM team, with a designer, and you've got the bandwidth to be able to create the variants you need to drive, bespoke personalization on a regular basis, great. If you're, starting out, you're a little bit further into that journey, but you're still a small team, creating those variants sometimes just doesn't add the value. So yes, it would be nice to do, but there's probably better ways to spend your time and money on. And this is where something like an Octane can help, because suddenly you go, well, actually, from an automation perspective, we can have pre-canned designs, but just plug and play based on those parameters. We can use elements of those quiz data to start to drive more relevancy in comms or frequency in comms. And it's just, I think the takeaway, put the customer at the heart of everything you're doing as a brand. So if you're asking the question why, what are you going to use it for, and how do you deliver that on a commercially viable basis?
Yeah, sensible advice. And if people are listening in, people might be thinking, I don't believe I can make this quiz work for my brand and my products. Or they might be thinking, well, actually, I've got a few technical questions about how I can do this properly and what effort I need. How do they reach out? Who do they connect with?
So either reach out to Dave or I directly at Paase. So the website is www.paase, which is paase.co.uk. Email addresses are Dave at or Phil at, and Phil with 2 L's because I'm a little bit awkward in that regard, or simply hello@Paase, and one of the team will be able to connect and help.
Fantastic. And thanks as always for everyone for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Keep your ear open for our next episode. We drop them every Tuesday. Do let us know if there's any specific topics or technologies you'd like us to feature. Do subscribe if you haven't already, and we'd love that rating on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Until next week, everybody. Thank you. For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host Paul Rogers via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.